A millionaire left his wife over infertility, but when he saw her again in charity gala, his heart sank by seeing her with his twins. The crystal champagne glass slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor. But James barely heard it crash. All he could focus on were the two children beside Sarah, their faces a mirror of his own at that age. How could he have been so wrong? And, more importantly, would they ever forgive him for walking away? Before we begin, please consider subscribing, as your support helps us create more meaningful stories for you. James Anderson was not the type of man who typically ran from adversity. He had grown up in a modest home, raised by parents who believed in hard work and perseverance. Still, when the doctor's voice on the phone told him, "I'm sorry, but based on your wife's test results, it appears she cannot have children," James's world wavered in a way he'd never experienced. His hopes of starting a family with Sarah, his high school sweetheart, the woman he'd loved since they were teenagers, suddenly shattered like fragile glass. That day, the corridors of the hospital felt endless, the walls pressing in on him, and each step echoed a dreadful finality. Sarah had always dreamed of being a mother, and James had always pictured himself teaching a son or daughter how to ride a bike. That was supposed to be their shared story, until it wasn't. Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Anderson, was every bit James's counterpart in strength and determination. She had been the anchor that kept him steady through life's unpredictable storms, from financial struggles to the early days of their marriage when they barely had enough to pay the bills. But motherhood was sacred to her. The possibility of never holding a child in her arms, never hearing that sweet voice call her Mom, was a devastating blow. The emotional toll on Sarah was obvious. Tears seemed always on the brink of spilling. However, James's reaction was more subdued. He withdrew into himself, haunted by insecurities he'd never confronted. What if I can't fulfill her dreams? What if she can't be happy with me anymore? These thoughts tormented him, blending into sleepless nights and anxious mornings. In a moment of panic and despair, James chose the one path he had always criticized in others. He ran. He left Sarah, claiming he needed space to process. He framed it as though he were saving them both from a lifetime of regret and disappointment. But the moment he packed his suitcase, a twinge of guilt stabbed his heart so profoundly that he almost turned back. Almost. Yet fear overtook reason, and James walked out of the small suburban home they had shared, leaving Sarah alone in the living room, her tear-streaked face a heartbreaking image he would never forget. There was no dramatic confrontation, no bitter argument that night, just a silent acceptance that he was too weak to stay and face a future he believed would be filled with suffering. Would James's guilt ever let him sleep peacefully again? And would Sarah truly be forever robbed of the dream she held so dear? Life has a peculiar way of throwing unexpected curveballs, moments that challenge the very essence of our beliefs. Shortly after James left, Sarah received an urgent call from the hospital. At first, her heart raced with dread. Was there some other terrible piece of news they needed to share? Instead, she was greeted with a flustered apology from a hospital administrator. A mix-up in patient records meant that the fertility diagnosis she'd received was incorrect. Another patient named Sarah Anderson had the condition that rendered her infertile, not her. Relief coursed through Sarah's veins, but anger and sorrow soon followed. If only James had stayed a moment longer, if only he had been by her side for that one critical phone call, maybe their entire future would have been different. Then came another shocking revelation. Sarah discovered she was not just pregnant, but expecting twins. The pregnancy felt like both a miracle and a curse, as she was forced to navigate this life-changing news alone. Friends encouraged her to inform James, but pride and a profound sense of betrayal held her back. How could he leave so easily, as if their marriage was just a fragile contract? Over the next 9 months, Sarah struggled with the physical demands of carrying twins and the emotional weight of doing it without her husband by her side. Each doctor's appointment was a mixture of joy, seeing 2 heartbeats on the ultrasound, and deep sadness, realizing she would have to muster the strength of 2 parents on her own. In the suburbs where they once lived together, Sarah now lived in a smaller, more affordable apartment. She sold most of their shared belongings and used the funds to prepare for the babies. Tiny onesies, cribs, and the endless stock of diapers she'd been told she would need. Old friends visited sporadically, bringing hot meals and baby clothes, but their pitying glances were sometimes harder to bear than the loneliness. Each kind gesture reminded her that James was not there, that he had missed every milestone. The first time she felt a tiny kick, the doctor's congratulations on her healthy progression, the baby shower arranged by a co-worker from the school where she taught. As Sarah faced motherhood without James, would her heartbreak eventually transform into resilience or into a lasting bitterness? Time carried on, as it always does. Sarah gave birth to 2 beautiful twins, Ethan and Emma. The day they arrived, her hospital room was flooded with warmth and love from friends and a few relatives. The nurse placed Ethan in her arms first, a tiny bundle with dark wisps of hair just like James's, and a determined cry that echoed through the ward. Emma came moments later, more petite but equally spirited, her little fingers curling around Sarah's thumb as though refusing to let go. In that tender moment, Sarah cried tears of indescribable joy and heartbreak all at once. She felt James's absence acutely. Would he have cut the umbilical cord? Would he have held them both against his chest with tears in his eyes? The what-ifs haunted her. Yet motherhood proved to be a force more powerful than her sorrow. As the twins grew, Sarah dedicated every ounce of her energy to ensuring they had the life they deserved. She took on extra tutoring jobs at the school, sometimes grading papers late into the night to pay for daycare. Her days were an endless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, errands, and moments of pure wonder, like watching Ethan giggle at his mobile toy or seeing Emma's wide-eyed fascination at sunlight filtering through the curtains. Every milestone, first words, first steps, was documented in thick photo albums that lined a small shelf in her living room. And so, a decade passed in this unwavering devotion, punctuated by the quiet acceptance that James had chosen his path, and she would choose hers. The memory of James lingered, but the twins were growing. Would the father they never knew unexpectedly return one day? A full 10 years after their divorce papers were signed, Sarah had become a well-respected teacher and a devoted mother. She raised Ethan and Emma with firm kindness, ensuring they grew into thoughtful, empathetic individuals. Ethan was the more introspective twin, often found in the back of the library lost in a book about historical events or new scientific discoveries. He carried an air of quiet intelligence, just like Sarah, and his gentle heart often led him to help classmates with their homework. Emma, on the other hand, brimmed with confidence and curiosity. She excelled at sports, singing, and led a small group of friends who looked up to her leadership. The siblings were inseparable, supporting each other in ways that made Sarah's heart swell with pride. Everything changed one evening at a charitable gala hosted by the city's educational board, an event Sarah initially had no intention of attending. But the principal insisted it would be good exposure for her department. So Sarah reluctantly agreed and decided to make it a family affair. Ethan was thrilled at the prospect of wearing a suit, feeling quite grown up. Emma, less enthusiastic about formal clothing, still relished the chance to explore the fancy banquet hall. The siblings spent most of the evening sampling appetizers and marveling at the ornate chandeliers. Sarah mingled, discussing curriculum reforms with other teachers, unaware that fate was about to intervene. James Anderson arrived at the same gala on the behest of a close friend who was a prominent donor. His last decade had been a restless journey. After leaving Sarah, he bounced from one job to another, never finding the sense of purpose he'd lost. His friends would comment that he looked haunted, though James never openly shared his deepest regret, abandoning the woman he loved when she needed him most. Standing by the buffet table, James felt a strange pang in his chest when he spotted a familiar figure across the room. It was Sarah, looking more radiant than he ever remembered. Time had only graced her with poise and gentle resolve. Then his eyes drifted to the two teenagers at her side, and an inexplicable tug of recognition seized him. They look like me, he thought, heart hammering in his chest. At first, James was rooted to the spot, torn between the urge to rush over and the overwhelming anxiety that kept him locked in place. The rest of the crowd faded into a blur as he watched Sarah guide Emma to a seat at a table, while Ethan carefully balanced a plate of hors d'oeuvres. Their mannerisms, the shape of their faces, there was no denying it. They were his children. Questions flooded his mind. When? How? Had the hospital made a mistake? Did Sarah remarry? Slowly, he approached, each step feeling as if he were wading through molasses. When Sarah finally noticed him, her eyes widened. Surprise, then anger, then a guarded sorrow passing over her expression like storm clouds. James has come face to face with his past. How would Sarah and the twins react to his sudden reappearance? The initial confrontation was painful and tense. "James," Sarah said in a clipped tone, her posture rigid. Emma and Ethan paused, looking between the two adults. Emma immediately sensed the thick current of negative energy swirling around her mother. "Is this someone you know, Mom?" Emma asked sharply, protective instincts kicking in. Sarah swallowed, trying to maintain composure in front of her children and the many eyes around them. She managed only a stiff nod in response. James stood there, fumbling for words that refused to form. Finally, he managed a quiet, "Can we talk somewhere private?" They found an empty side room, lined with old portraits of educational benefactors. The faint hum of the gala's music spilled in from the hallway, but within those four walls, the tension was electric. Sarah kept her arms folded, drawing an invisible barrier between them. The twins hovered near her, uncertain yet curious. James looked at them, Emma's defiant stare, Ethan's more open, questioning gaze, and felt an immense wave of regret wash over him. Clearing his throat, he began the only way he knew. "I had no idea. I was told you couldn't." His words faltered. He glanced at Sarah, who looked at him with an expression that was part anguish, part fury. Would Sarah reveal the truth, or would her pain overshadow everything she had to say? Sarah held herself steady, unwilling to dissolve into tears in front of James after a decade of fortitude. "There was a hospital mix-up," she said finally, voice taut. "You left before I could tell you that you'd been wrong. We had been wrong." She explained the moment of realization, the hospital's frantic apology, and the bittersweet reality of her pregnancy. James's jaw clenched as he listened. Regret sharpened into a physical ache in his chest. Finally, he turned to the twins, voice trembling. "I'm your father," he said as gently as he could. Emma gave him a searing look. "Father? You mean the man who abandoned Mom?" Her words cut into James like shards of glass. With tensions running high, how could James possibly bridge the chasm he had created? In the days following that disastrous reunion, James tried to reach out repeatedly. He sent messages, letters, even approached Sarah's school under the pretense of wanting to volunteer, but every attempt was met with silence or politely curt dismissals. Emma refused to even be in the same room with him, while Ethan harbored a cautious curiosity that he carefully kept hidden from his sister. Sarah, too, was torn. Part of her felt that James deserved to be shunned, that the pain he had caused should never be forgiven. Another part, however, remembered the tender, loving partner he had once been. Could people change? Did he deserve a chance to make amends? Despite her inner conflict, Sarah maintained a strict front to protect her children. She found it easier to focus on her busy teaching schedule and the twins' extracurriculars than to confront the emotional storm James's reappearance had stirred. Emma excelled in choir and even joined the track team, pouring all her energy into these pursuits. perhaps to distract herself from the father-shaped hole she never realized she was missing. Ethan, meanwhile, began spending more time alone, reading articles about medical errors and how frequently they occur. He found a strange comfort in understanding the science behind mistakes, trying to rationalize how fate had placed him and Emma in this predicament. Would James simply fade away again, or was there more to come that could change everything? A few months slipped by. James, driven by remorse and a quiet determination, sought the truth of that hospital mix-up, hoping to piece together a timeline that might explain how everything fell apart. He visited the hospital archives, sifting through old patient records, with appropriate permissions, of course. What he found only deepened his regret. It was a simple typographical error. One, Sarah Anderson, had been mistakenly assigned the other's lab results. A few keystrokes changed the course of 4 lives. Yet, to James, this wasn't just an administrative glitch. It was the root cause of his greatest mistake. If only I had stayed a little longer. If only I'd trusted Sarah to handle this together. He replayed that day in the hospital corridor endlessly, feeling powerless to rewind time. Meanwhile, life carried on for Sarah and the twins. On a crisp autumn evening, Emma wrapped up track practice with a sensational win that earned her a spot in the regional finals. Sarah was elated. Ethan, equally proud of his sister, shared a celebratory dinner at their favorite family-run pizzeria. The siblings chattered about the competition, homework, and upcoming choir performances, momentarily forgetting the shadow of James's reappearance. As the night wound down, Ethan mentioned offhandedly that he'd seen James outside his school library one afternoon. Sarah stiffened, but Ethan quickly added, "He didn't try to talk to me. He just watched from a distance and then left. He looked sad." Sarah offered no response. She simply gazed into the distance, tears of conflicted emotions gathering in her eyes. Would guilt and regret be the only legacy James left behind? Then came the turning point nobody expected. Ethan began experiencing unusual fatigue. What started as mild dizziness during PE class escalated to frequent headaches and episodes where he nearly fainted. Emma, always quick to notice changes in her twin, grew anxious. Sarah, alarmed, scheduled doctor's appointments. Blood tests revealed a dire reality. Ethan was suffering from a rapidly progressing kidney condition. Their local specialist referred them to a bigger hospital in the next county, where a nephrologist confirmed that Ethan would soon need a kidney transplant. The news rocked their small family, overshadowing all other concerns. Sarah's life spiraled into a blur of hospital visits, insurance forms, and desperate phone calls to potential donors. Extended relatives, close friends, everyone was tested, but nobody was a match. Emma offered to be tested, though she was too young, and that alone complicated ethical considerations. With each passing week, Ethan's condition worsened. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his once lively spirit grew quiet and lethargic. Sarah watched her son slip away, her heart breaking anew every day. The family is in crisis. Would James find out in time, and what would he do? Word of Ethan's condition eventually reached James through a distant cousin who still kept in touch with Sarah. The moment James learned of his son's plight, he felt a renewed sense of purpose overtake him. He marched straight to the hospital, fear and love battling within him. When he approached Sarah in the waiting area, her eyes were red from sleepless nights and worry. She tried to stand to protest his presence, but James spoke first. "I heard about Ethan. Please, let me help. I can be tested." His voice was firm, unwavering. Sarah searched his face, seeing the desperation there. Part of her wanted to reject him on principle, to keep him at arm's length as punishment for the past. But reason and a mother's love for her child conquered her pride. She gave a slow nod. James underwent a series of blood tests, tissue typing, and myriad medical evaluations. Days passed in excruciating suspense. Emma seethed with resentment, hating the fact that the father who had caused so much pain might be their only hope. Ethan, for his part, was too ill to fully comprehend all the family tension swirling around him. Finally, a doctor called them all in to share the results. James was indeed a suitable match. A heavy silence filled the room. It was as though the entire world had pressed pause. Emma's breathing hitched. Sarah covered her mouth with trembling fingers, and James closed his eyes, silently thanking whatever higher power he believed in that he might atone for his failure by saving his son. James can save Ethan, but will Sarah and Emma accept his help? And what consequences will the surgery bring? Hospital bureaucracy delayed the transplant slightly, but eventually the day of the surgery arrived. Sarah sat between Emma and James in the waiting area, the tension thick yet overshadowed by worry for Ethan. James tried to speak to Emma, but she refused to meet his gaze, arms folded as she stared at the floor. Sarah offered James a tentative glance of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently. It wasn't forgiveness, just an acknowledgement of this critical sacrifice. Within an hour, James was wheeled into one operating room, Ethan into another. Emma, tears silently rolling down her cheeks, finally looked at her father as he disappeared through the swinging doors, her hardened expression cracking into something uncertain. The surgery was lengthy. Sarah and Emma waited anxiously, pacing the corridors. The hospital lights buzzed overhead, the sterile smell of disinfectant mingling with the strong coffee Sarah clutched. In those agonizing hours, mother and daughter exchanged few words, their thoughts consumed with one prayer. Please, let them both be okay. When finally the surgeon emerged, fatigued but wearing a hopeful smile, Sarah and Emma nearly collapsed in relief. The operation had been a success. Ethan's body was showing promising signs of accepting the new kidney, and James was resting, though in pain. In that moment, as relief flooded in, Emma grabbed Sarah's hand, and they both wept. Would this life-saving act truly mend the rifts, or would the scars remain too deep? Recovery was a slow process. Ethan remained in the hospital for several weeks, carefully monitored for any sign of organ rejection. James also required time to heal, though he insisted on being wheeled to Ethan's room as soon as he was able. On one such visit, as James was pushed into the room by a nurse, he found Emma there, reading quietly to her brother. When she saw James, an array of emotions flitted across her face: resentment, curiosity, and a flicker of gratitude. James spoke softly. "How's he doing?" Emma hesitated, then answered, He's doing better." She glanced at her father, finally managing, "Thank you for doing this." That thank you was like a fragile truce. In the weeks that followed, James stayed in a nearby rented room to remain close to the hospital. Whenever he was mobile enough to visit, he and Ethan would talk, at first about surface topics like video games or books. Over time, they delved into deeper conversations. Ethan was curious about his father's past, about James's family, and what drove him to leave. James, raw with remorse, admitted his fears and the terrible decision that had snowballed into a decade of estrangement. The more they spoke, the more Ethan's guarded skepticism gave way to empathy. Emma has softened slightly, and Ethan is forging a bond with James. But can Sarah bring herself to trust him again? Eventually, Sarah found herself having longer conversations with James as well. Nightly visits to check on Ethan often overlapped with James's own visits. Their talks were cautious, as though both feared stumbling over the fractured pieces of their past, but each conversation held a seed of healing. One night, under the harsh fluorescent lighting, Sarah mustered the courage to ask, "James, do you regret it?" Really regret it? The question was a silent test. Was he truly remorseful, or just fulfilling a sense of obligation? James's eyes clouded with sorrow. "Every day," he whispered. "I thought I was doing the right thing, sparing us both heartache. But I was wrong, so wrong. I've spent 10 years wishing I could take it back." Sarah nodded, tears glistening. Perhaps that was the first honest step they'd taken together in a long, long time. Word of Ethan's improving health soon reached the rest of the community. Teachers from Sarah's school sent encouraging messages. Emma's track team chipped in for a "Get Well Soon" banner, which they hung in Ethan's hospital room, brightening the sterile walls. Even the local press, who occasionally covered feel-good human interest stories, picked up on the family's reunion. The doctor's final assessment came a month later. Ethan was cleared to go home, albeit with strict guidelines for medication and diet to ensure the kidney's continued acceptance. James was also discharged, though he would need several weeks of rest and follow-up appointments. Ethan is going home, but does that mean James will return to his life elsewhere, or stay to mend the broken bonds? In the aftermath, the question of James's place in the family loomed large. Sarah, now acutely aware that James had just saved their son's life, felt torn. Could she open her heart again to the man who had once caused her so much pain? Emma, for her part, was wrestling with conflicting emotions, part resentment, part gratitude. And Ethan, longing for a father he had never really known, seemed eager to form a relationship despite the complicated past. During one quiet evening at Sarah's apartment, they all sat around the dining table for the first time. The twins looked older than their years, shaped by the drama and trauma of recent events. A sense of cautious hope filled the air. Over dinner, small talk eventually gave way to more profound acknowledgments. Sarah shared stories of the twins' childhood, how Emma once tried to fix a broken lamp with a stick of butter, and how Ethan had read entire picture books before he could even form complete sentences. James listened intently, absorbing every detail he had missed. His eyes brimmed with regret, but also gratitude at being offered a second chance to know his children. Emma, seeing how moved James was, found her anger softening. "You missed out on a lot," she blurted, neither accusing nor forgiving, just stating a fact. James nodded solemnly. "I know. And I'm so sorry." They're starting to mend, but can they truly move on and become a family again? Small conflicts still surfaced. There were moments when Emma refused to share any personal stories or achievements with James, claiming he had no right to them. Sometimes James's presence brought back painful memories for Sarah, and she would retreat behind a wall of silence for days. But in every conflict, there was also a slow, cautious reconciliation. James remained steadfast, determined not to abandon them again. He attended Ethan's follow-up appointments, accompanied Emma to one of her track meets, where she ran faster than ever, though she didn't look toward him in the stands, and even offered to handle errands and chores to give Sarah a break. Each act chipped away at the fortress of resentment. One pivotal moment came when Emma injured her ankle at practice. Sarah was stuck at a parent-teacher conference, and James happened to be closest to the track. The coach called him, and he arrived within minutes, helping Emma to the car and driving her to the urgent care clinic. During that ride, Emma finally broke. She cried, admitting how terrified she was of losing Ethan, how angry she was at James for missing so much of their lives, and yet how confusing it felt to see him now, trying so hard to be a father. James, tears in his own eyes, listened quietly and apologized in a voice choked with emotion. It was a conversation neither would ever forget. Emma's walls are coming down. Could this be the turning point for the entire family's healing process? Meanwhile, Ethan grew stronger every day, helped by medication regimen and careful diet. His doctors were pleased with his progress, and he returned to school part-time. Though more reserved than before, he held a newfound respect for life, and for his father, who had literally given him a second chance. He sometimes urged Emma to forgive more readily, reminding her that time was precious and that James, though flawed, was making real efforts to be in their lives. Gradually, Emma began to reflect on her brother's words. Was it really worth clinging to anger forever? As weeks turned into months, a cautious sense of normalcy emerged. James found a stable job in the community, determined to stick around rather than flee as he had a decade ago. He started renting a small apartment not far from Sarah's place, making it easier to spend time with the twins. Occasionally, Sarah would drop the kids off for weekend visits, a surreal experience for everyone, as they navigated the complexities of a father reappearing after so many lost years. Family dinners, once rife with tension, became occasions for measured laughter and mutual understanding. They are edging closer to reconciliation. But will the scars truly fade, or will they always linger beneath the surface? Sarah and James's relationship, now freed from the immediate crisis of Ethan's health, faced a different set of questions. Was there room for them to rebuild something romantic, or would their connection remain focused solely on co-parenting and friendship? One evening, after a particularly heartwarming family outing to watch Emma run in a regional track meet, James walked Sarah to her car. They lingered, the cool night air wrapping around them. "We've come a long way," James said softly. Sarah nodded, feeling the bittersweetness of the moment. "I'll always be grateful for what you did," she replied, eyes flickering with memories of both joy and pain. Though they did not embrace, there was an unspoken warmth, a realization that healing could be a long but hopeful road. As time pressed on, Emma's hostility subsided into something akin to cautious acceptance. She even allowed James to attend one of her choir performances, smiling tentatively when the audience applauded. Ethan, more open from the start, found a genuine bond growing with his father. They discovered shared interests, a love of classic rock music and a fascination with stargazing. On clear nights, James would drive Ethan and sometimes Emma to a nearby field just beyond the city lights, where they'd set up a small telescope and marvel at the constellations. In these serene moments, it was as though the intervening years melted away. They felt like a family, imperfect but inching toward wholeness. Time brings them closer. Will this newfound unity hold, or will old wounds resurface? Inevitably, discussions about the past cropped up. Sometimes Sarah found herself revisiting the day James left, wondering if she'd somehow contributed to his fear. Other times, James explained the sense of inadequacy he felt, believing he was sparing them both from a future of heartache if they could never have children. The more they talked, the clearer it became that their tragedy was rooted in miscommunication and that single phone call with the hospital. If either had paused to share their true feelings, or if that phone call had come just a day earlier, how differently might their lives have turned out? Yet regret served as a reminder that they had survived life's cruel twist, even if it left them battered. Sarah's resilience shone in every lesson she taught at school, in every bedtime story she read to the twins, even now as they were teenagers. James's determination surfaced in each job shift, each therapy session, and every instance he tried to right his past wrongs. And the twins, shaped by the absence of their father, now witnessed firsthand the power of love and forgiveness. As the final act of their story unfolds, will the family find a way to move forward, together? The true turning point came in a moment of shared vulnerability rather than dramatic upheaval. One weekend, after Emma's successful participation in a regional track meet, Sarah invited James over for a quiet, celebratory dinner. It was a simple gesture, but profoundly significant. The dining table, now expanded to fit them all, felt like a symbol of their evolving relationship. Amid the soft clinking of cutlery, laughter rose when Emma recounted how she nearly tripped over a misplaced baton but recovered in time to win. Ethan added his own jokes, referencing past mishaps in their family life. Then, during a lull in conversation, James cleared his throat. "I know I can never fully make up for leaving," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "But I want you both, Ethan, Emma, and you, Sarah, to know that I'm not going anywhere again. Ever." The words, spoken simply, carried a weight that echoed in each of their hearts. Emma blinked, tears forming. Sarah's lips curved into a tentative smile. Ethan reached out to pat James's shoulder. It was a moment of emotional truth, the family's silent acknowledgement that they had all traveled a long road to get here, and they weren't about to throw it all away. With time, acceptance quietly took root. Emma found she could talk to James about everyday things without feeling anger twist in her gut. She even discovered they shared a keen sense of humor, a hidden trait that made them both snicker at puns and silly movies. Ethan's health stabilized, and his gratitude toward James slowly translated into genuine father-son bonding. They would attend local baseball games, each discovering a sense of normalcy in the experience. Sarah, observing these changes, felt her own bitterness loosen its grip. She saw that James's commitment was not a fleeting moment of guilt, but a sustained effort to be present. Eventually, she allowed herself to forgive him, not naively, but with the wisdom of someone who understood that life's tragedies often stem from misunderstandings and fear. She harbored no illusions that everything was suddenly perfect, but she believed in the possibility of a renewed future. On a golden Sunday afternoon, they all found themselves in a local park, having a small picnic. The gentle warmth of the sun, the smell of fresh grass, the laughter of nearby families, all served as a soothing backdrop. Emma was teasing Ethan about something silly he had done during the week, and James attempted to defend his son playfully. Sarah, watching them, felt an unfamiliar swell of contentment. This, she realized, is what family can be, even after all the heartbreak and years of absence. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to build something new upon its lessons. No more major conflicts loom, but how will their story conclude with a lasting impact? As they packed up the picnic gear, Sarah caught James's eye. With a small smile, she nodded toward the twins. "They're lucky to have you in their lives now," she said softly. James exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I'm the lucky one," he replied, voice thick with emotion. In a spontaneous gesture, Emma and Ethan both stepped forward, linking arms with their parents. The four of them walked back to the car, the setting sun casting long shadows that intertwined, a simple image of a family rediscovering itself, step by cautious step. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that second chances can bloom in the most unexpected ways. Life has a way of teaching lessons when we least expect them, but it's never too late to rebuild what's been broken. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Remember to treasure the moments you have with those you love. Don't forget to like, and also, a simple thank you in the comments means the world to us. And if you'd like more stories that make you think about life's fragile twists and turns, please consider subscribing for our next tale.